So there's a dilemma going on, a trust problem, one where it's hard to get the solution to. But you have to simply use evidence to prove to other people how things work. So the thing is about the San people. The San people, or the khoisan people, are the first in the southern African regions, and you can prove it very fairly easily using rock art or anything like that. But I think that's not going to be necessary for the video I'm making. I think we should use language again. So we have our trusted Congolese dictionary from the 1600s and prior to that, 1500s to 1600s, meaning that it's a very old dictionary. Then we have a whole bunch of Bantu languages, and remember, Bantu languages on average don't have clicks. But if you go to Khoisan languages, not even one of them doesn't have clicks. They all have clicks, and they have numerous amounts and numerous ways of doing it that is more than the Bantu ones, which are, tend to be Nguni. The Nguni ones tend to have clicks in them. This proves that they had a more recent unification, meaning that this unification between the two languages is not old. Again, I can prove using DNA evidence that the Khoisan people are not stagnant. They were not one culture that remained the same forever. And some people try to utilize their names. I mean, the reason why they're called Khoisan is because they are literally thousands of tribes. And this is before a lot of those tribes were genocided. There was thousands of different tribes unified by their nomadic lifestyle, but even that was not consistent. They were nomadic. There were some that lived only on the coast, some that lived inland, some that followed rivers, traders, some that only lived to the northern southern parts, some that lived in the lower southern parts. And again, I can show you all kinds of writings from all types, but let's not waste our time with that. I've shown you enough writings. Vasco da Gama talked about how part of them were hunting seals. Now, I don't have to waste my time reading these in order to let you know that some of the Khoisan had all the other things that all the other people all around the world had, from stone buildings to, everything, sheep, cattle, all that other stuff. Now, given this, that it's real, that all this stuff was real, why is it that Khoisan people are seen only as like hunter gatherers by people? What is that stereotype? Why is that like a thing? Especially if you consider the fact that we have actual individuals from different countries who played a large role in the 1800s. Well, the answer is because of romanticism. Some people, they just want to put you in a box. It's like ancient Egyptians. Yeah, some people believe if ancient Egyptians were around, they'd still be living as they were. They'd probably be living like modern people today. But Khoisan people want to put them in a box. But, there's lawyers, doctors, everything is the same as everybody else. There's even a stereotype about them not being black. You hear this a lot from Westerners who, let's just say it, are racist. They tend to say that these people are not black, even though the color of the Khoisan people is it's not an exception. It's there everywhere in Africa, from North Africa, Central Africa, Lower Central Africa, and the southern tips of Africa. For example, I mean, my people are mixed with Khoisan, but for example, those Khoisan people that I show you, they look like my family members, and of course that's because some of my family members are Khoisan. But now I don't want to deceive and pretend that they did it completely on their own. We don't see iron or any of that other stuff being utilized by these people until very much later, which is probably brought to them by the Bantu people. Now, why would I say the Bantu people brought these people iron and stuff like that? It's because the ones that we do see utilizing it, they utilize it in the same way that Bantu people did. And that's just a fact. So then what does that mean for the Khoisan people? That means they probably had the longest running cultures in history. Now, before I mention this part, remember modern times call for modern measures, and the Khoisan, like I said, were as modern as everybody else. They didn't just remain in a specific way. I mean, I've told you about specific people, but this here is Henrik Witbooi, and he was a great leader of the Nama. And at first, he helped the first initial defenses against the white people who eventually would lead to one of the most horrific genocides in Africa. In fact, some people say that this genocide was one of those genocides that were responsible for, or not responsible, but were the precursors, the pre versions of what would happen in Germany. Now, I don't know why people say it like that, as if the people in Germany are more important than the Khoisan people, but that's a direct quote. What happened to the Nama and the Herero at this time is devastating. A quick rundown of what happened. Actually, I'll save that for another day. I've already told you that it's a genocide, and but the thing that's more important is that this guy belonged to a royal family, and he wasn't the first. He didn't just was part of that royal family. And again, these people were growing in influence and everything until the Germans came and sort of changed everything. There's about 14,000 Khoisan people in Angola, and there used to be Khoisan people in large numbers in Congo. Now, if you go to places like Gabon, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, and even parts of Cameroon, you will find several Bantu tribes. One that's worth mentioning is the Benga people. And the Benga people are very interesting people, but again, let's save that for another day. But, you know, one of the things that you can easily do, like I said, if you could speak, it's like speaking English. One thing that you can easily do is tell when words come from English. Like if you hear fantastico, if you hear any of that stuff, you go, "Oh, I can kind of understand that word because it sounds very similar to English." And in the same way, from about like southern Cameroon, Central African Republic, some very southern parts of Sudan, and other places, you can see that Bantu languages are spoken. Actually, in South Sudan, there's a lot of Bantu. People don't know that there's Bantu people in South Sudan, and so the Bantu people are not limited to really any region in Africa. They actually spread out. And remember, I told you they were from Chad a little bit. We find DNA of Bantu people in Chad, but we find four groups in that area. We don't find Khoisan. So this is how I know that Khoisan people were all the way to the south, because we find Khoisan DNA going back thousands of years in southern African regions. But for people like the Benga, who we find very close to Chad, very close to all these other places, they actually got early into these regions. And so they might have not combined with the Khoisan people like how all the other people did, just like how a lot of the Bantu people would combine with a lot of the Sudanese people, creating new tribes in Sudan, which are a mix of Bantu and Sudanese people. Or if you look at Kenya, the Maasai are a combination of Bantu and Nilotic. Now, a question you might ask is, aren't these words offensive? Well, the word Bantu would be offensive had it been continuously used the way it used to be. But just like a lot of other words in Africa, it's sort of, first of all, it was created by us. And everybody who's part of the quote unquote Bantu tribes sort of has this word in the thing. So it's a very appropriate word, because it's like using the word people, and we can't just stop using the word people, which is what the word Bantu means. In other places, it's Watu. In other places, it's Bantu. It's all this other stuff, but all of it has to do with being Bantu. If you don't like the word Bantu, you can change Watu people. Or and what's the significance of it? Well, like I said before in another video, it's hidden in the name, the two thing, the history. And by removing this name, you remove the history of the Bantu people. It actually wasn't created by racists. I can show you that people who created this go back a couple hundred years before the racist people started utilizing it. And even the black people sort of were unified by this word. I mean, you can hear the saying umtu, meaning a person is a person because of other people. We can't get rid of this word. Now, khoisan, easier to get rid of. Now, I'd love to hear some suggestions which words we should use. I don't like the word khoisan either. I feel it doesn't have any meaning, and I don't know where it comes from, but I don't know what word to replace it with. I can't replace it with Nama because that's a specific tribe. I can't replace it with Kun because that's a specific tribe. I can't replace it with really anything Mu because that's a specific tribe. It's better that I just say Khoisan because it sums up all of those people. Now you're probably thinking, why don't we do what we did with the languages of the Bantu language? Use the word human and use that. Yeah, once I figure out what the word human is in Khoisan languages that is universal, we'll do that. But another one that people use is southern hunter gatherers. But this too is disrespectful because not all Khoisan people are hunter gatherers. In fact, the Khoi people were definitely not hunter gatherers. But again, it also like carries on the stereotype that these people didn't build anything. And like I showed you, genetically, the people of Great Zimbabwe were half Bantu and half Khoisan, meaning that Khoisan people played a role in Great Zimbabwe. So calling them hunter gatherers is not right. It's not accurate, especially the fact that there's like Khoisan people who like literally are lawyers, doctors, and all that. The guy's not a hunter gatherer. It's like calling Africans cattle herders, like calling Bantu or Niger or Sudanese or Egypt. Like, yeah, those guys are cattle herders. It's like it's true for a lot of cattle herders, but you can't call all farmers. You know, we're not all farmers. It's an occupation, there's a lifestyle, but not everyone sort of lives that lifestyle, so you can't do that. Now, prior to the trade of the Bantu people in the east side of Africa and the west side, which we're talking about the west side of southern Africa, we do not see trade goods by Bantu type people. We don't see the foods, we don't see any of that stuff, but we do see, like I said, a lot of the khoisan type foods in this region. Why is this important? Well, it tells you that people who are khoisan, again, were living a full trade life, meaning that some people, and this is true because of the Vasco da Gama thing as well. We've seen that these guys could literally travel from, let's say, Congo to Kenya, some of these people, for trade. This is how effective and real they were. Like, these people were not attached to one place. Today we look at them in that way, that they're just trapped in one region. But these guys would plan ahead for days and days and then walk the distance and be aware of the entire environment. Now, the environment would be changed later on, but I just want to put that out there because I feel like there's too many people who are not putting that information out there, that these people were far more sophisticated than we give them credit for. They were not just some tribe that sort of sat around with 20 people and then they would sit around a fire and tell stories. That is more of a modern thing, when they got trapped because they couldn't leave their nations because weirdos put up borders. And also, like I said, there are actual Khoisan people who were as modern and even built guns One notable member of this modernization is as early as the Dutch landed in Africa, we start seeing these people trading for modern goods with these people. We also start seeing a lot of, let's say, unfair treatment between these groups. But discussing the sort of sides where they made the achievements, like for example, this girl here, Kratoa, she's known as the mother of Afrikaans. Afrikaans is a Dutch language that is spoken by people, but this language would not be as extensive without the influence of Kratoa and other Khoisan people who spoke the language in the corner. So they brought, first of all, she brought in an English element, she brought in a French element, she brought in a African element because she could speak so many different languages. In fact, she was an interpreter for the Dutch. She was raised by, well, partially raised by the Dutch, partially raised by her own people. Her life is tragic, but I'm not going to explain that. It's great in one sense because it's this big scheme of this intelligent woman, but it's also a little bit tragic. That's a lot tragic actually. And you can see her life. She lived a modern life at the time. If you take her life as a person and you compare it to anyone who lived anywhere at the time, her life was as modern as anybody else. And so, again, bit disrespectful to make it sound like these people were trapped into one lifestyle and couldn't break out of it no matter what happened. There's actually a movie on this that was made with actual South Africans and was also made by Dutch people. I would say the people who are playing the Khoisan people are Coloureds, but that's fine because Coloureds are Khoisan too, especially the ones in Cape Town. So it doesn't really matter. But the movie is excellent. It's really good and it depicts, people and I think it does it in a fair way where it doesn't make them look stupid or silly or anything like that. They actually try to keep it very respectful while keeping to the original material, and I recommend everybody to watch that. Now, to prove that it wasn't just some strange coincidence, there's Auchumato, who is another Khoisan person. He was well, as we can read there, he was a chief of the Khoi people called brace for it, and then he, you know, was one of the interpreters. So you can see that there was something going on, trade going on, talk going on, and this happened prior to this, by the way. This happened with Vasco da Gama. As remember, Vasco da Gama traded a cow, a African cow, for with the Khoi people for I forgot what they got in return, but yeah, that happened. So the deals were pretty much as old as it gets. This guy's story is also pretty interesting, and remember, he's well written about in a book that's about the first Dutch people to land in Africa, Jan van Riebeck and all of them, which I don't think is a name I should mention right now because it's probably better in a bigger picture version. Now, I want to remind you that all of this that was happening was at the same time in Congo. Congo were battling the Portuguese. So in other words, if you were standing on the shores of Africa, you have two groups battling with two different types of people, and these people are playing their own games either way, and they're wising up to their tricks, and they're using their own tricks to try and get rid of these pesky Europeans who don't really want to. Well, it's pretty obvious they're not going anywhere. There are actually a lot more Khoisan people who played a role at this time, but we will mention them one by one instead of going through the whole thing. And I think I've done a terrible thing by mentioning two already here by, just passing by, because next time when I do a full video on them, people are going to think we've already seen this when you haven't heard nothing yet. Several leaders, females, males, children, artists who play giant roles in history the world over. A lot of people know about Sarah Butman for some reason. I don't know how she got so famous, but yeah, that's one of them who played a role. But she's hardly what I would call my favorite because you know it wasn't. She's not one of these geniuses that lived at the time. And I'm talking about real geniuses who invent things. So finally, let's just embrace a couple things. The khoisan did not are not a childlike, you know, Peacenarian group. They can be anything like any other group. And not only can they were, they embraced it to their core. And secondly, when it's time to pull forward, they pull forward. And luckily, they've survived till this day because there was a lot of stuff that came after them, from diseases that were brought by the Europeans to straight up genocide to other Bantu people who pushed them away from their lands. These people have been resilient and they're still around us till today. And not only that, they helped influence great civilizations in Africa, and they helped build some of the better languages of Southern Africa today. And hopefully their influence continues to grow well into the world.